Hello, Renegade Thinkers. Just in case you were wondering, content marketing is not a new idea. I know that may be a shock, but it's not. John Deere started publishing The Furrow, a magazine for farmers, back in 1885. By 1912, they had 4 million readers. They still have 1.5 million annual readers today. In 2000, the French tire company, Michelin, published its first guide as a way of encouraging a small group of car owners to take road trips in automobiles. Imagine this: at the time, in 1900, there were 2,200 cars in the entire country of France. But they had a vision that someday people would be traveling a lot by car. And if they did, they'd be using the wheels or the tires of Michelin. Well, 120 years later, Michelin has sold more than 30 million copies of its guide. And these are but two examples of highly successful and enduring content marketing efforts. Both reveal the fundamental notion behind the approach: deliver useful, timely, high-quality information on a consistent basis, and you'll generate a world of goodwill that turns prospects into customers and customers into fans. So why am I sharing this history lesson, other than the fact that I was a history major and tend to talk about history a lot? Well, in March 2020, when the COVID curtain fell, keep that in mind, the COVID curtain, because I think that is really what we've seen here, B2B marketers who had relied on events and direct sales efforts to fill their pipeline with leads suddenly had to pivot. It was like a curtain went down. That option, those options were no longer available. And the only place, or the primary place, these marketers could turn was digital, and more specifically, content marketing. Now, one such brand was Cheetah Digital, an organization that was in the middle of its own transition, having been known as Cheetah Mail for the better part of 2 decades. Which brings us to today's guest, Richard Jones, the CMO of Cheetah Digital. Now, Richard joined Cheetah about 7 months ago. Now, and I love this when we have CMOs who join and then 5 months into their tenure, the COVID curtain comes down, because that is a tell-all moment. But Richard isn't your sort of typical CMO who just came up through marketing. He was the CEO of Weigh-In, a company that had been acquired by Cheetah in 2019. So he came with the acquisition and then took over the reins as CMO. And while Richard has many insights to share, we'll be focusing this episode on how to build a content marketing machine with both the content and the tech to track performance. So Richard, with that long preamble, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So first of all, where are you in this, where are you situated in your work from home scenario?
Yeah, I'm, despite the accent, I'm actually based in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, well, you know everybody in the Rock. You sound like John Denver, of course.
Well, I have to say, living in Denver, I've not met many people from the UK here, but everybody that I do meet thinks that I'm Australian, and I don't know why.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I do think, and I've said this on the show before, because I've interviewed a couple of folks from the UK, and you have a competitive advantage. You sound smarter just by the accent. To the American ear, the English accent is like, oh, English, oh, smart. So
yeah, that's why we always play, the English people always play the smart criminals in the Hollywood films.
Exactly. No one will suspect they're criminals. Anyway. All right, so you're in Colorado, and when we had a prep call, we talked. You mentioned 2 things that weren't really in place in your department when you sort of took the reins. One was the ability to create great content, and the other was sort of to track leads that the content would generate. And I'm curious, which of those challenges did you tackle first?
Oh, the production of the content machine was very much the first foundation in kind of pushing this all out, and the measurement side of that. That's currently where I'm kind of embroiled as the sort of sorting out the next stage.
Okay, so but is that something that you would recommend if you're building this engine? The first thing to do is figure out what content you need, and what your strategy is for that?
Yeah, for me, it 100% would be, and it really comes down to probably my journey as an entrepreneur, and before that as a carrying the bag as a B2B tech salesperson. And ultimately, I think one of the things that we need to always be very cognizant of, when taking over the roles of a CMO, is just how much what we do influences other departments, and thinking about the chronology of how other departments use the outputs that we actually create. And so, one of the first things that I did when I looked at kind of what needed to be done in the department, taking over the CMO role at the beginning of November, was it wasn't just content creation because we needed more leads. It wasn't just about that. It was also thinking about content right the way through the organization. So if you're a new sales guy and you're coming on board and you're trying to figure out kind of what you should sell and how to sell it, you go to quite often your go-to-market portal that product marketing and marketing have set up, and start looking at the content. And ultimately, that first meeting that a salesperson has with the prospect, the content that is created there, through to the very first content that someone might see out in your advertising or out in your demand generation marketing, all of it has to be aligned, and it has to be delivered with quality. Otherwise, the sales reps are just not going to be able to perform as well as they need to be. So getting the content going was really, really important, not just for creating new leads, but also helping salespeople with existing business processes that they were operating with.
I think that's such an interesting point. And while I've always been a fan of thinking about employees as a target, what occurs to me as you were saying that is that, and I usually thought about it as the salesperson would take that content and say, share it with their own channels, which of course they can do. But what's so interesting to me is when you think about the content that you develop for consumers or your customers, you tend to try to simplify, you tend to try to get to the point, and you have high level benefits, then you work your way down. Whereas often when you read sales materials, here's the product, here's the target, and it's dry. And so it's so interesting if you start to think about your website is the thing that is going to inform your employees as to what you do. First of all, it increases the value of it, but it also makes you very conscious of, can I sell from this stuff?
Yeah, the rubber hits the road, always with the interface between the salesperson and the prospect, and what happens in that meeting, and what is their interest, is their follow on. And I think sometimes with marketing, we can be congratulating ourselves because we managed to create awareness, and we managed to create put ourselves into the conversation. But ultimately, that doesn't mean anything unless the salesperson, when the rubber hits the road, is able to progress a sales cycle. And so, thinking about that top to bottom of the funnel alignment, and how sales and marketing are going to pass the baton on from initial interest through to actually developing a sales process that hopefully ends in a contract, with revenue. And that's really kind of what we wanted to focus on. So, the measurement is extremely important, of course, because we need to know what content's working, what tactics are working, how they're influencing things progressing through the pipeline, etc. But without getting quality content and understanding how the content needs to, what kind of content we need to create at the top of the funnel, through to what kind of content does the sales team need to progress the sales cycle through the funnel, you're kind of running a little bit blind. And so, what we've tried to do, and we're in the process of kind of having rolled this out, and then making sure it is optimized as we move forward, is actually making sure that we have, and I'll give you kind of a bit of a brief explanation. There's nothing particularly groundbreaking in this. It's just good practice. We have our overall brand message of obviously who we are, and the value that we believe we offer to the market, why people should care. But underneath that, we have a set of different content themes that we're creating content about on a continual basis across a variety of different platforms, that essentially are the demand drivers that hopefully are the hook that get people into wanting to know more. And then the handoff between sales and marketing is really through these sales plays that we've created, which are really all the material that a salesperson will need to progress a sales cycle. And there's different content in those buckets and different level of granularity and different things you'll focus on. But essentially, we've got a framework so it's all aligned.
So how did you, again, as we're sort of bringing this down, and I'm imagining the marketer who, for whatever reason, flew in from Mars, they didn't have a content plan in place. They were relying on direct sales and events to do their thing. And so from a strategic standpoint, we know what the objectives are. We want to get people in and through the funnel, and we want to help salespeople. How did you decide on, say, the content themes and get to those from a planning standpoint?
Yeah, it was interesting because the content themes were to some extent the easiest thing to decide. The thing that required the most heavy lifting was to actually really step back, and in it, people in your audience that are coming into companies that are, have the same heritage in terms of timeline since the founding that someone like Cheetah has got. It's got 20 years of heritage, but actually to really understand the marketing problem that I had or I inherited, you need to understand the timeline of the company. And obviously companies don't stand still, they change. And obviously Cheetah had become part of Experian. So you've got a Fortune 100 massive company. They then spun out the Cheetah digital business from Experian. And that happened will be 3 years ago at the beginning of June. And actually, when you spin an organization out of another organization, what's not necessarily apparent to a lot of people is how much you lose as part of that process.
Interesting.
And in many effects, you're kind of like, it's like being in an airplane and you're kind of having to sort of, that doesn't have any, engine, and it doesn't have any tail, feathers or so. You've got to build this airplane as you're kind of falling, because you've lost a lot of stuff as you spin out. I mean, CRM systems, marketing automation systems, many of the things you take for granted of how an organization finance systems, that you take for granted, have to be created from scratch because you're coming out of another company. And so, we kind of looked at it, and there was many things that many challenges as part of that process. But actually, the first thing that I did was actually work with a couple of my other colleagues across departments, but really take ownership of that first call deck. What is going to get presented to the customer when they are asking for, who are you? Why does it matter? I mean, this is going back to very, very basic things. But once you've got that first call deck agreed and aligned, and everybody across different departments knows that this is our go-to-market messaging, you can then basically spin out from that and go, all right, here are the various different content themes that we need that actually are going to get people interested in the thing that we'll eventually talk to them about when we've got that one-to-one meeting. So it's almost like flipping it upside down.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So you know what when they get there, so these are little mini hooks to set up the big hook.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I get that. And so one of the things that there is no shortage of out there in the world is content. I mean, the numbers, and I could rattle off the number of YouTube videos that go up every second is mind-boggling, the number of tweets and so forth. How did you go about, and I know the answer to this, but I can't wait for you to share it with that. How did you go about making sure that your content was a little bit better than average, and that the quality was really good and the quality sort of made sense for your category?
Yeah, and there are some things that we have completed and achieved, and there's some things that we are in the process of doing. And so I'll answer that question from that perspective. So the first thing is really my reflection on B2B marketing and B2B content from the perspective of being a salesperson and then an entrepreneur, always selling to marketers through a 25-year period. And in that time, there's two things that I think really stand out about B2B content. The first is typically B2B content has been relatively dry. There are some people that are doing it fantastically, but on the whole, it tends to be relatively dry. And actually, I think it hasn't necessarily mapped to the way us as consumers have actually been changing. So, the formats being, hey, I've got this, 1 hour webinar or this 60-page white paper, and kind of that is it.
Right.
That's a big heavy lift in terms of time to get people in to do either of those two things if you're gating your content around such large, chunky bits of content that needs to be consumed. And so one is, let's make sure that the variety of the content is there. So that's talking about, not just having those formats, doing things like podcasts, thinking about more consumable content that is interactive, that maps to the very short time span that we all have now as consumers to kind of get to the point, as it were. So, and funny enough, that's a thing that I've seen through having conversations with many different CMOs at very large organizations. CMO of Oracle, CMO of HP. I've had these conversations with these folks, and what was interesting is this sort of general B2C-ification of B2B content that CMOs are thinking about now, which is, how do I make my content interactive? How do I make it short form as well as long form, right? Because people sometimes will want to go into much more detail. They get maybe further down the buying cycle, and they'll have the time to invest. But thinking about variety and the size and consumable nature of the content is really, really important. And then the second piece is really not really, is coming at, or how do you make the content not dry? You can make it small and interactive, and it can still be dry, right? There's no guarantee of success by making it smaller.
Right. It's just a little less. I mean, if it's boring, it's kind of boring, whether it was boring at 1 minute in or 10 minutes or 30. So yeah. Exactly.
And I probably done something which is a little bit renegade, I would say, in terms of my approach to this, which is, and I really don't want to offend anyone in the marketing world by saying this, but I wanted to have people in the content machine at Cheetah Digital that weren't professional content marketers, because I didn't want the content that we created to be formulaic. I wanted people to be coming at it from a very distinct perspective. And so what I did was go out and look at bringing in new talent into the organization, into the content marketing team that had actually used our technology, that had seen great success at it, and were able to tell stories around business outcomes because they understood the being sat in that seat of a B2C marketer versus a B2B, professional B2B content writer, as it were. That was a big change.
That is a big change. And I think the hiring of someone, I mean, the key part of this that I heard from that is hire, obviously, a CMO is only as good as the people that they bring underneath them, but bringing in someone who in this case was more of a subject matter expert, as opposed to who also happened to have some content wizardry inside them, but not necessarily just someone who had spent their career as content marketer. So you figured out where the holes in your content strategy were. You figured out all the channels that you want to develop. You hired an outside person who had some experience with your product, so they knew what it was like. Let's talk about actual execution and some of the things that you've done and what's been working really well or beyond your expectation and what hasn't.
Yeah, so a great question. In terms of what's worked really well, I think is being able to see how, when you've got a big lift in the quality, the format, and the variety of content that you're creating, seeing what that does to the organization as a whole, not just to your marketing organization, I think is really, really interesting, because you get this kind of explosion of interest about other people across the organization also wanting to create content. You know, when the platform is cool, lots of people want to be part of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Success has many fathers, right?
yeah, exactly. We went from, you know, literally just, you know, maybe 2 people creating content to now there's, you know, a virtual team of 20 or so different people creating content on a regular basis for us across the organization. We have 3 different podcasts, right? And this was a company that had no podcasts, you know, just as an illustration of kind of that variety. And it's people wanting to tell their own stories. It's not all about just the senior marketing guys, hey, come and listen to me. You know, it's not all about demand gen. We have practitioners that are experts in the services organization about how you're using our tool, talking about things that are relevant for them, interviewing other expert practitioners. Of course, we have many more customers coming on board now and wanting to tell their story. And I think that's also a good point when it comes to content marketing. There is nothing more important than, and there is no better tool in content marketing than having happy customers telling stories around how you were able to overcome challenges and deliver business outcomes, right? And not just, you know, stories which are at a very high level and at a bit of a platitude, but, you know, going into what were the problems, what were the issues, what were the big rocks, how did we overcome them, you know, lessons learned, those types of things. That is absolute gold. And one of the problems I think we've always had in B2B marketing is actually getting the volume of client stories that we need. And that's primarily because we've been reverting back to these older formats of like, hey, could we have this case study signed off, you know, which is a 20-page document, and it needs to go through the client's legal team, and that takes forever, and more often than not, you don't get it approved. So you end up creating content and it never seeing the light of day. And I think it's a very one-way process for most customers. It's kind of like, well, I spend a lot of time helping you out. You create this case study document, which is really good for your sellers, but you know, what's in it for me? And I think what we wanted to do with our content platform was put in something that really was a platform that was going to be good for our customers to participate on, and it was going to enable them to actually tell their story, which supported their goals and wasn't just all about us and Cheetah Digital and trying to create content that would help sell our products. And I think once you've got that platform, that you know, there is who, you know, people can clearly see what's in it for them. You get many more people wanting to come on and tell their stories, which, by the way, also means that they get comfortable with you and they will create more of the formal case studies down the line as well.
Yeah, you've solved a lot of problems there in that one. I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. One of the issues with content is it takes a lot of time and energy to pull it together. And so by creating a couple sort of success stories early on, you've got the rest of the organization to contribute, which is great. You also sort of unleash some creativity in the organization and allow them a chance to participate, which is cool. You also solve this issue of case studies and you getting customers to do it. And you do that right now in particular, where, you know, everything is sort of, we're in this moment of authentic and real and, you know, and slick is down and grit is good. So you have a moment in time that you were able to take advantage of. The one thing I hear when you talk about all these channels and all these things is, one, what holds it together, and 2, quality control.
Yeah, they're really good questions. And actually, because when you talk about things like quality control, it also, for me, maps back to an issue that you have with content marketing, which is one of the biggest issues that I hear from other folks in marketing, says the reason why they don't really do too much content marketing. And it does come down to this perception that content is very, very difficult to create and is a big heavy lift and there's time consuming and the rest of it, and therefore, you know, there's a barrier to entry to do good content marketing well. That's something I find quite interesting, because I don't necessarily agree that it has to be time consuming and heavy lifting to create great content. But at the same time, you do have to have a more relaxed view of governance. So I had a famous quote to me, because it's impacted my career so much. But I had a mentor that actually was the main angel. Used to be my boss in a prior life, and was their angel investor at the company that I co-founded and eventually sold to Cheetah. And he had come on as in between jobs to help us as kind of a, as a board member, as a kind of operating exec for a period of time to help us. So a guy called Dick Carhill. And he once took me aside and he said, "Richard, what are you doing to impede business, to impede growth?" And I remember being shocked and just looking at him going, I mean, clearly nothing.
I hope nothing.
I'm working, 60. I'm the hardest working person in this organization. I'm CEO. I'm absolutely killing it. I'm involved in everything. And he was kind of like, exactly.
Right.
You
get your hands out of the pie.
Yeah, you are a workaholic, and you're really good at what you do, but you're in everything. And that is impeding growth. And I went away and thought about it, and it's like, you're absolutely right. He was absolutely right. The ability, if you really take overall business performance as your, what you're going after, you can impede growth by getting in the way. And I see that lesson no more clearly so than in the content marketing that we've managed to set up and setting up the machine here in Cheetah Digital, because the team were almost afraid of their own shadow before I came in and made the changes that I needed to make. And you'd literally have content being created, and it would be going through, 3 or 4 different proofreads and multiple different people across different departments would have to sign it off. And then, creating one bit of content every 3 months is not gonna, change your world as a business. You need to be creating multiple pieces of content every single week. We now create so much content. We had to create an internal email for all of our go-to-marketing teams, showing them all of the things, the new research that was being created every week, the new webinars that are being created every week, the new podcasts are being created every week, new blog posts that are being created every week, the new short snackable pieces of content, any kind of interactive stuff that we did. That's every single week. And the only way you can do that is by giving people a framework of how the content should be created. So this is the stories that we want to go after. These are our content themes, our demand drivers. Making sure that your content team understand what is our unique voice in all of those areas, those demand content themes, and what are pieces that we want to get across, and then allowing people to have the freedom to go create that content without all of these layers of governance. Yes, I am responsible as a CMO of quality. And so, I have to make sure that I am looking at the content that is being created, and there is some level of governance, but it is far, far lower than we ever had before. And you can do it once you've got the right people in the right roles and they've got the right voice around the right content themes.
Yeah, I think the voice is really important. Obviously, you've created some parameters that are enough guide rails, if you will, to keep them running off the road completely. One of the things that you mentioned in there, because I think lots of companies think about webinars as suddenly everybody's webinaring, and certainly podcasts. But research is one of those methodologies that I still think continues to work really, really well. Talk a little bit about your approach to research and how you're using it to generate content.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would completely agree with you that research has a really big part to play in any kind of content marketing strategy. You want to create content that isn't just copying what someone else put out, right? You need to create unique content that is going to have value in the marketplace. One of those ways of doing that is through original research. We believe in research to such an extent that we actually have kind of a dual process for research. One is we will work with industry experts around research. So we just commissioned a really big piece with e-consultancy, which was a 6-market piece of research looking at consumer attitudes in the shadow of COVID-19, trying to unlock things that marketers, B2C marketers, would find valuable in how you can sell to people online, because that's all that's left, in a lockdown environment of COVID-19, and how people's attitudes changing, what's working, what isn't, et cetera, et cetera. So we did this big bit of research, and that's really, really important. But you also need to do your own research. And so we typically are creating on a weekly basis new original content, because once you've got scale as an organization, and Cheetah Digital is several hundred million in revenue, it has offices in 14 countries, we've got a window into what B2C marketers are actually doing, what email campaigns are working, what kind of interactive experiential stuff marketers might be doing, what do we see trending. We have data, we have a lot of data running through our platform. And so one of our goals is to expose that data for the benefit of all, to help marketers make better decisions. And so we're doing original research and our own, through third parties, and our own original research.
Okay, so we've got a content engine. In a sense, we've got the right people with the right voice telling the right story. We've got multiple channels. We've got original research being done so that the content that's coming out of it is, there's always the news value of research, and just that moment where I've got something new I can talk to you about, Mr. Customer or Prospect. And so research is awesome. So I want to go back to early March 2020 and say, what changed for you in terms of your approach to content? In what was it? Is it everything that we've been talking about? Because I know you had a lot of these things in place, and I just want to get to that moment in time where you went, no events, no Salesforce. We're going to really have to reshape what we're doing.
Yeah, and the reality with COVID-19 is it's a digital acceleration for many businesses, if not all businesses. And we had, the same digital acceleration. I mean, I inherited a marketing department that was very focused on, ABM marketing, on events and advertising associated around these ABM plays. And they had a very well-developed sales development team that were, hitting the phones, contacting people outbound around the kind of ABM strategies. But we're doing very, very little in content production and in online content formats like podcasts and webinars and other things. March the 20th happened, and we had literally just finished rolling out all of these automated sequences in a program called Outreach that we use. We have all of our marketing automation tools, which we built out our marketing database by about 20x in a very short period of time. We're really investing and sort of building that ecosystem for people that wanted to hear about our content. All of that automation gets set up, and we literally only had a few weeks of kind of running it, maybe a month or two, and suddenly COVID-19 hits, and you're kind of looking at your content, all of this automation that it's linked to, going, I can't be chasing people for first meetings right now. I just can't. It's not what we should be doing. And so we really had to, the team were up working very, very late, and in about 2 to 3 weeks, completely redo all of the content that we'd done before, and change all of our sequences, all of our marketing automation flows to map to this new content that was more consultative, helping marketers with what other people were doing and what we were seeing in the marketplace as they respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was a real acceleration of having to redo everything that we'd done in a very short period of time.
And what's funny to me as you hear that, I've always believed that content marketing should be consultative. So in some ways, this pushed you in probably a much better place than it's just hard to sort of sometimes connect the dots directly with a consultative approach versus say, here's our product and here's the story and here's how the customers are using it. But one of the themes that have come up more in the last 2 months is some CMOs I've talked to have said, the less hard I sell, the more helpful I am, the more we sell. Which I thought, oh, love that. That's enlightened self-interest in a very positive way. All right, we haven't talked at all about the technology, but you talked a little bit about it. Let's because we got to wrap up this episode, because like you, I'm trying to make things a little bit shorter in the COVID curtain era. Let's give us a sort of, if you would, the biggest two do's and a don't for all the content marketers out there as they're reassessing their content plans for 2020 and beyond. Two do's and a don't based on your most recent experience.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the kind of measurement side, the what to do there in a don't. in a do, I would say, the biggest do from me from putting out this content marketing engine is when you are thinking about, what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, making sure that you get people that can help you do that in a way that's interesting is key. And, to give you a little bit of a view of that, the SVP of content that I hired, the VP of content I hired, came to me by way of being a Motley Crue roadie, a producer for the MTV show Jackass, then into marketing technology, and had created his own agency using technology that he'd got from Cheetah. And so, you've got a guy with a whole arm full of tattoos who's wearing hats, who understands media innately and actually B2C media, so knows how to make things interesting. And that's really, really key, rather than having this very dry B2C delivery, boring. If I'm going to give you some of my time, I want to be entertained. And so I think that's a do. Making sure you got the right people with the right background and thinking outside the box in terms of who those right people are is important. From a do perspective, I would definitely always be thinking about how do you connect the content that you're creating to the wider ecosystem of content creators in your company? Because those content creators are out there. You just got to find them and let them loose, and then then suddenly the heavy lifting of content creation is there. From a don't perspective, I think this comes back into the phase I'm in really now around measurement. One of the things that folks quite often do when they're putting in new infrastructure is they go on a shopping spree. And I had inherited a company that had, or a marketing technology infrastructure that had basically got a tool for, every day of the week. There was tools coming out of my ears, none of which were particularly well integrated, or none of which were being used to their full capacity. And so I always believe simplicity is key. So we stripped back all of the marketing technology to the key components that are going to be our foundation. And then we went in, and we're in the process of doing that, is making sure that all those key components have the right setup and the right foundation to actually deliver us good data out the other side. And, that is not necessarily a very simple task when you're talking about things like years of how people have treated Salesforce and, making sure that the foundation of any data that you are showing to people is actually correct. And so really getting down to what are the core building blocks, making sure they're set up well, making sure the data is accurate, and then layering on new tools afterwards, I would say would be my recommended approach.
Excellent. And I'm all in on that. I mean, right now, when talking to CMOs about their tech stack, particularly if they had to lay off some people or furlough some employees, they're sitting there with a 25 high tech stack, and now they have fewer head count and lots of technology. So there's a lot of sunsetting going on as they call it, of technology. And really what you need is the key things that as you talked about it, what matters right now, right? And that's, it is about being able to track the data through the system in a way that's good for your customer and good for the company. All right, well, we covered a lot of ground here. The keys that I took away, and I love the part about number one, if your content is boring, stop. Right, full stop. And I don't care how long it is, if it's boring, stop. Number two, the notion that there could be other content creators in your organization, I think is a really smart way to go, because there also may be some folks that are maybe a little less used right now, right? That may have some free time that would love to stretch there. And they could be sitting in the software development area that you don't know. Don't assume just because they're an engineer, they can't write or can't come up with something interesting. So, all right, those are two really strong do's that got me thinking about a lot more questions, but we're just going to have to leave that for the next time. So first of all, Richard, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you, Drew.
And to the listeners, thank you. I hope this was interesting content. And if it wasn't, you stopped a long time ago. Anyway, until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.